Okay, good evening, welcome. So tonight's halacha share is a very interesting topic, the size of a couple. It's related to this week's Sedra, Parshas Tetzaveh, because Parshas Tetzaveh primarily deals with the clothes of the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen. The Pasuk says, "V'asisu bigdei kodesh la'aron achicha lekavod u'lesifaris." And when we talk about clothes, of course the Parsha is dealing with the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol, but we can talk more generally about Jewish clothes, and the couple, the yarmulke, the kippah, is a classic item of Jewish clothing. Now, what are the sources for wearing a couple? Where does it come from? There are plenty of sources. I've got a few on the sheet here. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. The first source is a Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Yud Ches. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna Bereid of Yeshua, Teisi li. Now, these Gemaras, there in Shabbos, Kuf Yud Ches, Teisi li means let it come to me, which means I did something extra special, and therefore I deserve Olam Haba because of this particular practice. So each Amira goes through a certain practice which they did, and he says, Teisili deloy sagina arba amas begilu harosh. It should come to me because I never went 4 amas without my head covered. That's one source. Next source, Rav Huna, this is a Gemara in Kiddush and Daf Lamed. Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua loy maski arba amas begilu harosh. He didn't go 4 amas without covering his head. Amas shechina l'mayla mireshi. Because the Shechina is on top of my head. And then the third source is also Gemara in Shabbos, over here. A very interesting source. An astrologer said to the mother of Rav Nachman, Barich ganvahu, your son is going to be a ganav. Make sure you don't let his head be uncovered. So she said to her son, Kasi reishech, make sure you cover your head. Ki hechi d'tihavi aloch imta d'shmaya, that you should have yira shamayim. U'boi rachmi and will daven that his portent of becoming a ganav should not come to fruition. Lehavi yoda maika omrele. And she didn't, and the son of Nachman didn't know what his mother was going on about. Cover your head, and that, please God, we should daven for you, and please God, you won't become a ganav. He didn't understand what that was about. Continues the Gemara, Yom Echad, Yosef Kogaris Tuti Dikla. He was sitting and learning under a tree many years later. Nofal Glima me Lui Reishe, and the head covering fell off. Doli Eine, he raised his eyes. Chazal Dikla, he saw he was sitting under a palm tree, and he saw Dekalim, saw dates. Al Me Yitzre, his Yetzahara became very strong. Salik Paske Lekibur Beshine, and he sort of climbed up the tree and just took a bite out of the dates. So you see, it's like a jack in the box. You sort of suppress it, and the couple somehow keeps the Yira Shemaim. But once the couple fell off, he just sort of his instincts, as it were, took over. And then the last source I've got on the page here is actually a Rambam. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim Chelik Gimel Perek Nun Beis says, they would be very careful not to have their heads uncovered. The Shechina should somehow hover over the head of that person. So you have 4 sources regarding wearing a couple, and they all seem to relate to Yiras Shamayim, and an awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being above you. In fact, the term, people use different terms for Kappel, a kippah. One of the common terms is a yarmulke. Now, a yarmulke is actually an acronym of 2 words, Yorei Malka, to fear the king, which is really the theme, if you like, of these sources, Yorei Malka. Now, the first thing we're going to discuss this evening is, aside from the sources, is do you have to wear a couple? What exactly is the status? Is it a mitzvah? Is it a nice thing to do? Is it a chiyuv to do it? That's number 1. And number 2, we will discuss, in Mitzvah Hashem, the reasons to wear a couple nowadays. And also then we'll talk about the size of the couple. How big does the couple have to be? And then we'll discuss some sort of more interesting sort of practical ideas and themes about this topic. So do you have to wear a couple? There are 2 primary views. One is that wearing a couple is not obligatory, but it's a midas chasidus, it's like a virtuous act to do. And then there are those who hold it is obligatory, mandatory halacha. So the midas chasidus, the first view is 3a, is the first source really is the Maram Mirottenberg. The Maram Mirottenberg, one of the last of the Balei Tosfos, the Rebbe of the Rosh, the Maram Mirottenberg says that it shows Yira Shamayim and Derech Eretz, but it's only a Midas Chasidus. And he brings a proof from the first source we quoted, the Gemara in Shabbos, because the Gemara says there teisi li, which means let it come to me. But all of those things were over and above. You don't say teisi li because I put on tefillin every day, teisi li because I didn't eat treif, teisi li because I kept Shabbos. It's obviously something which is over and above, and therefore it must be Midas Chasidus. So the Maharam Rottenberg is of that view, and another proponent of the view that it's also Midas Chasidus is the Maharshal. So the Maharshal in the Tshuva, which is the main box on the page, he was asked the following question: She'elo, lemi shereisha kovet, someone who's got a heavy head, he's got a headache. Yesh lehetza leishe v'lechel begilu hirosh. Is he allowed to sit with his head uncovered? Rabbi Yerucham Kosav. So Tshuva, sorry. Ein ani yodea issa levorech b'lo kisurosh. Says the Marshal, I'm not aware of an issa to make a bracha with your head uncovered. For Rabbi Yerucham Kosav, she'osa levorech b'gil rosh. The Rabbi Yerucham, one of the Rishonim, does say that it's also to make a bracha with your head uncovered. For lule she'eneni rogel lachlek ala kadmonim. And it's not my practice to argue with the Rishonim. That I would actually be makel for levarich begila rosh. I would actually, were it not for his words, I don't want to argue with him, but I would actually be of the opinion that there is no issa. Even to creed kriya shema would be allowed with your head fully exposed. Shari issa b'medrash Rabbi quotes an interesting medrash. Omer Rabbi Berachia melech basav adam meshage prut gamal, which is an igeres from the Malchus, a royal letter. Medina, he sent a letter from the king to the state. Mahim Oisin, when they want to read the letter, Kol bnei haMedina oimdim al ragleim u'peirim es rasheihen. All of them stand. They uncover their head as a sign of respect. V'korin oisa be'ema be'yira v'reses u'v'zeil. They read it with tremendous awe and trepidation and respect. Avla Kodesh Baruch Hu Yisparach Omer Yisrael Karu Krishma. Because pragmatia didi, it's prutkama, sorry, didi, it's like my letter to you. Hari lo hitrachti aleichem likros le'omdim v'lo preirosh, and I'm not making you trouble to read that letter standing up, nor with your heads uncovered, but rather just say Krishma as you would normally do. Mashma, the implication of that Gemara is, that Medrash is, lehedya deleka issa b'priyas rosh, that there's no issa. I'm not troubling you to do it, but if you want to do it, you can. Which would imply that there's no issa in saying Kriya Shema with your head uncovered. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not imposing that on them. But what can I do? Rabbi Yerucham has said it's asa, I don't want to argue with him. But says the Marshal, but what does perplex me, what people say that it's also to go with your head uncovered even outside of tefillah. And where does he get this from? The only time we see there is an issa for a woman to go with her hair uncovered is a married woman. And there's a midas chasidus, is a virtuous act to not go daladamas with your head uncovered. V'davka halicha daladamas kadisa bekol kisvei omra funa brei Yeshua teisiri deloisagi daladamas, and this dafka daladamas is the Gemara we've quoted said. V'um midas chasidus k'moshe shechoshev mein chateisili, etc. And that's again the raya that the Maharam Rottenberg brings, that the whole thing is a midas chasidus. So that is the first viewpoint. The Taz, however, famously argues and says that wearing a kappel is an obligatory halacha. If you look at the bottom box, the Taz in Archaim Siman Ches Sif Cotton Gimel says, "Ubeinin ikah hadavim yesh issa liyos begil rosh kosav Marshal the inisim mitzadadin." He quotes the Marshal and says, "It's a midas chasidus. There's no issa to have your head uncovered." V'nirali sheyesh issa gomor. I am actually of the opinion that it is strictly prohibited. Mitam acher, for a different reason, tahainu kiven shechoiku achshav bein ha'akum. Since it seems to be a non-Jewish law, she'oisin kain tomid tekav sheyoshin parkin me'aleim hakova. That as soon as they sit down, it could be in their places of worship, they take off their head covering. You don't sit in church with your head covered. If we therefore go with our heads uncovered, we're sort of imitating their practice. And certainly when there is rationale for us to have our heads covered because it inspires Yirah Shamayim. So the Taz argues with the Marshal and is of the opinion that it's obligatory halacha based on the pasuk of B'chuseim lo yiselechu, not to imitate non-Jewish practices which is a love. Now, there's a tshuva of the Yechavadas. If you turn over the page, the Yechavadas, Rabbi Yosef, he was asked the question, is it necessary, we're going now to the size of the couple, is it necessary to wear a couple which covers all the head, most of the head, parts of the head? And he brings both opinions of the Taz and Marshal, and then he says, I'm reading just an extract there, Mikol Mokum, the last paragraph in that box, Mikol Mokum nire, shebekisui harosh bizmanenu. Wearing a couple nowadays, I'm going to suggest a third reason. In addition to the possibility of it being a Midas Chasidus or of it being an absolute Issa, I'm going to suggest a third reason. Yesh tam yosev in Midas Chasidus, more than it just being a basic Midas Chasidus, ki yodua, because it's well known. Shezeh darkim shel chovshim parkei ol Torah mitzvahs laleches bilegarosh. Someone who is not religious, it's their practice. Someone who's abandoned the way of Torah mitzvahs will go with their head uncovered. V'yesh hekem yuchad bein ovid yilikim la shelo avdu. There is a clear demarcation of those who serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, those who don't. Those who serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, generally speaking, they would wear a couple. Those who don't, wouldn't. Al Yidei HaKippa Shel HaRosh, that's a sign. Shehadatim Nizharim Meleches Tomid B'Kisei Rosh, a person who's religious will generally wear a couple. V'hofcham HaKippa Me'al Roshim Semel La'odem Dati. And therefore, a person who wears a kippah, he's therefore going to, that's a sign for him, a symbol of his religiosity. Shemeir Shemayim Olav, that he's Yirei Shemayim. V'mkein Misha Helech B'Gul Rosh, and therefore someone who goes with his head uncovered, yesh lochush bo mishum marasayin. That's a shayla of marasayin. Why? Sheyachshaduhu lefeirik al machlos shemayim me'olov. You're sort of declaring that I'm actually not interested in Yira Shemayim, in religion. Even though there may be some Jews who come from Chutz La'aretz, v'nagul aleches begilui rosh, come in hagam Chutz La'aretz, and perhaps their practice is in Chutz La'aretz not to wear a couple for maybe reasons of danger. Einam elam miut, it's a miut, it's a very small minority. V'lochein yesh makom lochash b'zeh al kol panim mishum maras ayin, and therefore not wearing a couple, says the Rabbi Yosef, is an issue of maras ayin. V'komeshne of yisim nekim Hashem Yisrael. So three reasons, if you like, to wear a couple nowadays, either because it's a midas chasidus, that's what the Maram Rottenberg and the Marshal say, or it's an absolute prohibition not to wear a couple, or says Rabbi Maras Ayin. Now, the mainstream view in the poskim nowadays is that it is a midas chasidus, and there is flexibility, and it's interesting because, years here in London, in the professional world, in the city, you didn't see kippot going back, say a few decades. You didn't see it. I'm picturing in my mind's eye the person who works in a very prestigious law firm, and in my view, I think he's probably the first person sort of in our times who would wear a kippah. This is going back 30 years. He was the first person that I know of, maybe there are others, who would wear a couple in the city in a very established law firm. And now you see it a dime a dozen. You see loads, Baruch Hashem, and you see it in hospitals, and you see it in all professions, in the professional world of people wearing couples. But going back a few decades, it was quite normal for people in their professional life not to. And the reason why that would perhaps be okay is because it's not one of the 630 mitzvahs, it's not a mitzvah drabanan, it's a mitzvah chasidus. And therefore there was a bit of flexibility about it. Now there's a very interesting tshuva of Rav Moshe. Take a look at paragraph 5. V'lochein, lemaisa, haroitze lahachma, says Rav Moshe, haroitze lahachma v'lochash das hagan, I think it's Rav Shlomo Kluger, tzarich lechasas roiv reisha. Really, a person, when he wears a couple, he should cover the majority of his head. Shehu b'roiv hakoivim. Of a yarmulkes, of a kippos hagdolim. You have a normal size, a larger size couple, that will cover the majority of your head. But you don't have to be choshesh to cover the majority of your head. Again, Rav Moshe takes on that the whole prohibition is not an absolute halacha, but it's a midas chasidus. Even though it's become so established, people think, hey, how can you go without a couple? It's osa, etc. We don't have to be more religious than the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. Even though you wear a couple, that your head is considered covered. You're allowed to go out in the street, and even to make brachas. If a person wears therefore a very small couple, don't be judgmental and consider him as a lightweight. But it's okay so long as Nikra Reisha Mechusa. So it's considered that he's wearing some form of head covering. Now, what exactly is that? So if you look in the Yechavadas, he sort of gives me a clearer clarification of what exactly the size of the couple should be. Really, it should cover all the head, even with a small couple. So long as it's visible from all sides. From either from the front and from the back. Now I had that a few weeks ago. I was walking up Gold Screen Road on Shabbos, and you've probably had that experience before. The guy walking towards you, is he Jewish? Not Jewish. You're not sure. So you're on the side of caution. You say Good Shabbos. If you get it wrong, he'll just think you're weird. If you get it right, then you've done. You said Good Shabbos to somebody. And when he's walking, you can't quite see if he's wearing a couple. You catch him as he's passing you, and you can see maybe a tiny couple in the back of his head. So says Rabbi, it should be seen from both sides, from the front and the back. Now it can be a small couple, not covering the majority of your head, but it needs to be visible. Mikol stadi harosh. Ulo. However, Rabbi does add, b'shas kriyashma v'tfilah shemekabel lova machshamayim, when a person davens and is mekabel machshamayim, sorech lizoy yosel lilbash kippa shemechase roiv harosh. You should try and wear a couple which is covering the majority of your head. You should wear special attire to greet HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the size of a couple, it does not have to be a large couple which covers the majority of the head, as long as it's visible. And if you're buying one, please go for the 3-year-old. So, Ms. Hashem, there's a great shop, by the way, of Golden Road. You can get all funny. Someone asked me recently, do I know where I can get dinosaur couples? I don't know, but this shop has a whole range of couples for kids, and so long as it's seen from the front and the back, then that is it. It does not have to cover. It's not like a Rosh Shiva's little couple. It covers so long as it's visible from all sides. Just a couple of interesting things. Whilst there may be grounds not to wear a couple because it's Midas Chasidus in terms of there's danger or there's financial considerations, I think a couple of points. Point number one. I'll tell you a great story. I know of a fellow, this is going back, 30 years. He was in law school. He got a job in a very prestigious English law firm. It's a firm called Nicholson Graham Jones. I'm not sure if it's still around, but it was a very, very English firm. There were no other Jewish people there. And this guy who went to law school got a job there. He was, he was a yeshiva graduate. He went to Rabbi Kushlevsky's yeshiva. He had pears behind his ear. He was a frum person, and he was just thinking to himself, as he, on the first day of work, as he was preparing to go to work, should I or should I not be wearing a couple? Again, it sounds crazy, certainly for the American listeners. This is so accepted over there to wear a couple, but in other, maybe European countries, it was less common in some decades ago. Baruch Hashem, now it's different. But 30 years ago, this guy, who I know, and he told me the story himself, was wearing a couple on the way to work, and he got off a bank station to go to this firm, and from the bank station, the underground, to get to the front doors of this plush English firm, he had this inner turmoil. Yes or no? Do I or do I not wear a couple? And he's aware that it's a Midas Chasidus and it's not absolutely required by halacha. That's the consensus of the poskim today, like the Marshal. He decides he's going to wear the couple. He goes in there, he has a week of induction, and then the way it works is you have 4 seats of 6 months in different departments. And the first seat he's put in the property department. Again, the only Jewish person in a very prestigious English non-Jewish law firm. After a few days of being in the property department, the head of property calls him in and said, excuse me, what is this thing on your head? I'm sure he said, how are you doing here? How are you settling in? But he goes, but what is this thing on your head? And he said, it's called a Kappel, kippah, yarmulke. Why do you wear it? Well, Orthodox Jews wear this. And it's to remind us that God is above us. Has anyone spoken to you about this? No. Has anyone told you to take it off? So he said, no. So the fellow said, good. Because if anybody tells you to take it off, I'm going to start wearing one. I'm the head of property, and no one is going to tell me to take it off. I remember telling my father this story. This is a long time ago. My father, when I told him this story, he said it's very similar to the story of the King of Denmark. When the Jews in the Second World War, when they were told that all the Jews have got to wear the yellow stars, the King of Denmark famously said that all my citizens will wear yellow stars, and I will wear a yellow star to thwart your attempts to abuse the Jews. And aside from that, there's a concept of Adam Nifel Lefi Maisav, that a person is very much conditioned by his actions. And certainly if you are in the wider professional world, wearing a couple, it may not be absolute halacha. Of course, it's very established minhag, and from a person would nowadays it's way more acceptable. But in terms of how you behave and how you conduct yourself and the boundaries that you have in place in that professional and working environment, it's actually very important. Because it's a reminder, a constant reminder, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you the whole time. And also in terms of boundaries between how you interact, it hopefully will set the tone a little bit. A protective psychological restraint. So there we have it. So just to summarize, the connections to the parashas so we're talking about clothes for the Kohen Gadol. Wearing a couple is very much a Jewish item of clothing. Various sources, as we discussed, for wearing a couple all seem to point to Yireh Shamayim. And do you have to wear a couple? Well, there are two main views. One says Midas Chasidus, Mar Rottenberg and Marshal. The Taz says it's obligatory halacha. The Rabbi says an issue of Maras Ayin. We seem to paskin nowadays it's Midas Chasidus. However, one should try and to wear one as much as possible for the reasons given. And the size of a couple, although Rov ratio is preferred, wearing something which is recognizable from all sides would be sufficient. Okay.